Everybody needs, really, to do this. You need to keep some sort of firm recognition of the fact, quite simply, that words, ideas also, same thing, but words are a form of energy, and any other purpose they may serve is secondary operations. If they seem to have some specific purpose in the conveyance of some information, it is a secondary characteristic at the time, because the primary function is simply that words are energy. And some of you, whenever I repeat something similar to that, I see the little light of recognition, or else some of you are back on drugs. But notice that you almost can never remember that. Put to you another way, if the ordinary level of intelligence is operating, if your brain is operating along the normal patterns, it is impossible. It's not almost impossible. It's not sort of and kinda. It's just simply impossible. Because that brain operating at the level and with the kind of energy it operates and for the purpose for which it is established, it cannot do likewise. It cannot jump up and run at the same time. It cannot stand still and look at the bottom of its own feet and etc. It cannot. But it is quite simple. Among the many ways that you can, after I try to suggest to you perhaps, but that you can see the difference between humans and every other creature that's visible on this planet. The opposable thumb, that's a nice shot. That's pretty good for high schoolers. And of course then they try to, some of them, zoologists and anthropologists, and I know 2 or 3 people that own septic tank companies have tried to say, have even tried to say that it's not just the opposable thumb. They come up with other such things as language, which is fair, except language is the operation. Language is the verb of the brain being a noun. It is words. They can even say that if it were not for the cortical part of the brain, the frontal lobes, that man would not be that different from any other of his close relatives here on this planet. It's words. There are other ways you can look at it. This is not just the one view, or else we'd be back to this. It'd just be a new hole to look at. It's got to be a bigger hole, not just a different hole. It is words. You can cut it all sorts of ways, but the one thing that you cannot overlook, that cannot be dissected to the point of disappearing from a revolutionist view, from a more complex view, is words are the forever distinction between man and any other creature of which ordinary intelligence can be aware. Any other thing that's visible, sensual, on this planet, in this world, in this life, is words. And words are not just some sort of strange something that humanity stumbled upon. It is not survival of the talkatist. It is not survival of the most verbose. It is not something that man accidentally has stumbled on. Words are a form of energy. You can leave it there, or if you want to, you can go ... parentheses, and say any other purpose they apparently serve, or any other purpose they do seem to serve, is secondary. Because they are first, foremost, and you can leave it at that once you see it, that words are a form of energy. They're a form of energy. Man moves a form of energy that no other creature, no other being serves or moves on this planet. That's the beginning, that's the end of it, and if you remember that, it might come in handy. It can certainly come in useful if you're trying to go somewhere up here, because that's a piece of a map that you cannot overlook. You cannot continue folding maps in the same old way and leave this on the bottom, because no matter where you try to get to, you'll never actually get there. You can talk about it. You can turn to your own brain and say, hey, we're here. And your own brain can go, yay! But you're not there. If you had ever done that, you wouldn't be fooling around with this, because you'd have believed that you could get somewhere and you'd have stayed there. Just one more drink and I'll be all right. Just one more trip and I'll be okay. Just one more marriage, just whatever. Any other secondary activity in life, just as one more thing will be conclusive. When you forget that words are energy and that any other thing that seems to be served by the use of words is secondary. Secondary. If you forget that, then there's not much else you can remember. So much for vague, if not overt threats. Now on to, are the girls ready? Now on to the entertainment. Pick up a few other things. We're still talking about my unstated new creation myth and words being a form of energy. I left you somewhat with a rhetorical question vis-a-vis one of the things I was mentioning last time we was taping. I was back to using the nice hardwired everyday examples of financial and weather forecasting and pointing out that everyone with any just ordinary reasonable intelligence and reasonable memory knows that no one, all the way from Harvard graduates to the head of the Federal Reserve System to the head of the U.S. Meteorological Society or NASA, whoever it is, that no one can predict what's going to happen tomorrow with finances. They can't even predict 5 hours from now what's going to happen to the weather. And yet, large areas of human talk, of energy being moved, seems to be based on this, and people listen. And I was using another example, getting to the rhetorical question that I left you with. I said that I had seen one weather person make the little comment that, hey, my prediction may not be right, but at least it's relevant. And I talked several ways about that. And I ask you to consider how that might be used internally. So I'll make some further sketch on it. On a personal basis, consider the sentence, the words. It may not be right, but it's relevant. Consider how it is that, from an ordinary view, that other people are just absolutely full of it. I mean, other people might as well be economists. Everybody else might as well be weather persons. Because, well, look, everybody else is just absolutely full of ideas, opinions, information, forecasts, predictions, threats that are totally unreliable, incorrect, foolish. We all know that, right? If we're all ordinary, we all know it. You're just surrounded by it. Does it matter? Oh, yeah, if you're a routine sorehead, it may matter. Then you go, yeah, but does it matter? Does it matter that you're surrounded by people? You're surrounded by weather forecasters. You're surrounded by economists. And what they say may not be right, to say the least, as that weatherman admitted facetiously. But it doesn't matter because it is still relevant. Think about it. Now, I'm sure from an ordinary view, you would all can follow this, that you probably knew or thought you knew a few people that were reasonably intelligent. You had some friends before you got involved with this. Not that you can't have friends after this, but I don't know. But you had some friends that seemed to be reasonably intelligent. That is, oftentimes their opinions and etc. seem to dovetail with yours. But other than those few people, the rest of the world, by and large, is full of people that are full of it. They're weather forecasters. Their ideas, their opinions. No, there's a fairly wide spectrum if you're fairly sophisticated. It's all the way from people with just skewed views of ordinary things, all the way from that to just absolute intellectual maniacs. Just people whose ideas could not be more wrong-headed if they deliberately tried. So, you've got the large part, other than maybe you and 2 or 3 other people you knew. Then the rest of the world's population to varying degrees fit into that weatherman's comment. That what they say may not be right. And you go, yeah. But now here's the part. But it's still relevant. How do you explain that the rest of the world, by and large, is full of it, intellectually? That you're just surrounded by dunderheads, cheap intellectual shots. You're surrounded by, and yet what happens? To the best of ordinary knowledge, the world has been plugging along here with humans for a good 5, 6, 7,000 years. Of course, you've only been here for 20, 30, 40, and from an ordinary view, it's been probably 20, 30, or 40 of the world's most trying years. And that's obvious, but notice, the son of a gun keeps chugging along. And in spite of the dire predictions of economists, weather forecasters, environmentalists, priests, rabbis, your mother, in spite of that, does it not strike you sometimes? I hate to be insulting, but even after you die, that things may go ahead. Things may roll right along. The point is, how, from an ordinary view, if you could use intelligence the way the dictionary says ordinary people are using intelligence, how do you explain that? That everyone else, by and large, is full of it. That is, their information. They don't always call it predictions like the weatherman, but they're forecasts. That's what it is. What they state as absolute facts is their forecasts. That they are, by and large, just a few exceptions, the people you personally knew. Probably you attracted them due to your supreme intellect, like a flame and moss and all that. But other than those few people, the rest of the world, by and large, their information is not correct. So how do you explain the fact that everything still, in spite of that, still rolls along and gets better and better, healthier and healthier, fatter and fatter, taller and taller, more and more efficient, faster and faster, slower and slower, shorter and shorter, wetter and wetter, drier and drier, all possible ways in which life can expand. It is expanding in spite of the fact that you might as well have the whole world except you and a few of your buddies stand up and everybody admit, well, our forecast, our opinions, the operations of our intellect may not be right. And you went, yeah. But you didn't hear the rest of it because it had never been said until I said it for you. Well, that weatherman said it that I made up. That what they said may not be right, what they believe may not be right, and yet it's relevant. That it still is pertinent to the overall transfer of energy, the overall continued growth and health of life. In spite of the fact that all the predictions, to varying degrees, all the information, to sundry levels, all of it's faulty, unreliable, undependable, flawed, and yet it's all pertinent. Of course, for those of you that may be getting this on tape at some other time in some other place for the first few times, the insinuation being that if you could see and think a little bit above that level, that of course everybody's information, their predictions, their opinions, etc., are not faulty. But notice from the ordinary view they are. Your view toward others and their view toward you. Oh, I know you don't want to think about that. That just shows how dumb other people are to think that you're wrong. It's just further proof of how dumb they are. But from a quite other view, you see that it is pertinent. It's not a matter that people are wrong. It is a matter that my new creation myth and legend, if I had been specific in its telling, might have suggested that this creation, reality, came about via the delivery of these three great families. Remember, the Seaforth family, the Height family, the Goombachi family. Of course, there are other ways I can tell it. The families were DeForest, Brett, and the Colombo family. But it's all the same. And they all have their own paradigm genetically wired in that tells them as it should, and tells you, your own nervous system as it should, that what I am thinking, that is what my own nervous system, the sounds it makes, the genetic patterns in me, are right on. But you got no choice. That is, what I know is very close to an absolute living imprint of reality. Not only as it is, but as it should be. What I'm striving for, what the great cosmic forces put me here to do, is to do this good work and simultaneously be sure that these other people do not get in here and interfere and muck up life. It's part of my duty. A little aside, since if anybody thinks I was actually picking on weather forecasters, which none of you do, and if any of you do, to hell with you. No offense, it just shows how far out of touch I am with the viewing public. Do we still have a viewing public? By the way, you people seeing this on tape, I didn't have anything to do with this being on television. If you want to hear a real cop-out. So whatever you think, it's not my fault. I was going to point out that along with weather forecasting, besides the sorts of things I mentioned, there you are sitting around in the morning, you being an ordinary person, and you do turn on, or you listen, you give an ear to the radio or television or the forecast. And even though, especially after me pointing this out the last few times, you're aware of the fact, you've surely got enough memory once I jogged you a little bit to know that they can make dead into the camera forecast. They can show satellite maps taken only 2 hours ago showing the movements of the jet stream, the clouds, the front coming in from the west in the United States normally, especially through this part of the, but anyway, normally moving from west to east, and they will show that only 500 miles away in an adjoining state right now it is heavy thunderstorms and will pass through here. It is moving now at X miles per hour and it will pass through here and be gone by in the morning. And you know, if you got any memory at all, not to bet. Don't take any even money bets on that. You just know that it's unreliable. They can't do it. And yet, notice that you will listen. Many people, I say you as an ordinary person, while knowing that. And of course, while as first stories and everything else should go, you forget it. But knowing that, you will give an ear, you look up, and it's cloudy and cold. And the radio says it's cloudy and cold, which don't get upset yet because they can go outside assuming that the station is within a close radius to where you are. They can go outside and look like you and say, well, it's currently, getting in their official broadcast voice, it's currently cloudy and cold, but based upon the satellites and the weather forecast, that it will, by noon, it will be clear and warmer. And you will listen to that and be cheered. Or you'll stop whatever you're doing to listen that they're going to say that when, if I jumped out, or if you jumped out yourself and said, you know that that's not even good, at best, that's an even money bet. You know you can't depend on that if you got any memory at all. And yet you'll hear it or want to hear it and be cheered by it. Now I'm simply going to point out, at least any of you think that we have been unkind to the business of meteorology. Notice this, it is not unlike religious faith. Not unlike it at all. That the nervous system, under no earthbound circumstance, can give any defense for religious faith. That is, when you die, you don't die. Well, something makes that sound good to me. All right. There is a purpose in that kind of talk. There is a movement of energy, or people's nervous system would not have come up with it. Life would not have had access to go through and give those stories, and other people would not respond to it. But notice, you also cannot prove, even the people doing it. If you want to look at weather forecasters as priests and rabbis, the weather forecasters can't do what they say they do, and yet they do it with a straight face. And you, I'm suggesting, many people with ordinary nervous system with a straight face will say, shh, and turn up the radio to hear them say, although it's cloudy and cold now, yeah, by noon, it will, the front is moving from the west and at such and such miles an hour, and by noon, early afternoon, it will be warm and sunny. And you feel cheered, like hearing, when you die, you don't die. And you're cheered by it. You feel good. When it won, now there's a genetic basis, I say again, for all of this, but I'm saying at the ordinary level at which the intellect operates, if it even operated as it defines itself in the dictionary, you would realize this cheer is just, the hope of a fool. It is groundless. It is baseless. Based upon everything I have experienced at this level, at the ordinary intellectual level, in this life, there is no reason to believe, just because they said it's going to be within the next few hours, warm and sunny. I feel much better. I'm glad I heard it. I made people hush a minute. I turned it up. I went, and I looked out and I felt good. Sometimes I go to church. I go to the temple. And I hear them say blah, 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 and I feel good. Consider that an aside, but it has to do still with the operations of energy being moved by words, and the words appear to be one thing. They appear to have some specific purpose, which if they do, if the weather forecast makes somebody feel good, it's secondary. Now it's important in the same way that, based upon the arbitrary and artificial division I've made between primary and secondary activities as defined by moi, the secondary are now as important as primary. You couldn't have it. The hobbies of life, they're as important as the primary nowadays. So the purpose that religion, the purpose that weather forecasting, financial forecasting seems to be serving, which I was pointing out from one level, is unreliable. To say the very, very least, to be as charitable as possible, it's unreliable. It always is. All predictions are. Man can't predict the future since he is the future. They're all unreliable, and people know that at one level. If you ask them, if they could ask themselves, do I have any reason to believe this? The answer is no. The answer is no, 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 and then no some more. And yet I hear that, and I'm cheered by it. I feel better by it. The purpose is the movement of energy. Anything else is vis-a-vis that purpose. Everything else is secondary. If I had given my literal telling of a new creation, legend, story, myth, something else that I hit in passing last time we were taping, but I would also suggest that right after reality came into being, and all of our ancestors popped up, that just right after reality produced man. It produced in man the door. The door. It is where life talks to man in a singular way in our universe. If you continue to let life make you answer the door, that is, think ordinarily, if you let life continually make you answer the door, then it doesn't matter who's there. It doesn't matter who the guest seems to be or what the message is at the door. It is the answering of the door itself that is the hook, the gaff, the pickle, the punchline, is you answering the door. I was trying to give a slightly different sketch about such things as how, although it's hard to do it in the beginning, I understand, for someone to try and turn real quick on their own nervous system, on your own brain, and see what's going on. Of how it is that you cannot be involved at the ordinary level of people feeling such things as guilt and remorse, arguing with themselves, trying to hit themselves intellectually to the point that they rebound, that they strike back over what they're thinking, taking responsibility for it under certain conditions as opposed to. That which the nervous system does, there is a way in which a few people, for whatever reasons they find, can cease responding to it in the same way. In times past I referred to it as such as a tiger behind the door, and it's not a matter of going through some sort of mind tricks or meditation or, of course, drugs. And that in some way you stop all the noise, as some of the Zen stories gets translated as, that we still the pool, they say, and the mind no longer moves. There is a basis for them saying that, but to take that literally, you've missed it. Because the mind that will hear that, the intellect that will hear that, cannot do it. And so forever, it's a nice first story, and it's forever impossible for the mind that would hear that. So it's not a matter, that is not the most efficient way to approach it. It is not a matter of stilling the mind or taking this tiger that's always been growling, whatever your growl is, whatever your internal noise is. It's not a matter of some way of stopping it. The most efficient way to consider it in the beginning is the tiger's there. The tiger's there as much as the noise of your stomach is when you're hungry, the pounding of your heart, if you've got high blood pressure or sensitive hearing. The noise is there, but it's a matter that it's almost as though you can get the tiger in a closet. And the noise is still there, but it's just background noise. You no longer take that as being you. What I was hinting that I might have included in my new creation myth was to look at another way, that life is made with man's intellect. The brain itself, at the level at which it operates now, is a door. It is a passageway through which, we'll say, the more complex genes of life communicate to the more simplistic, lower level of genes in us. It is how life talks to man specifically and uniquely. You're being talked to in other ways. You're being talked to in ways that religion and mythology and psychology has tried to refer to as nonverbal or subconscious. You're certainly being talked to. Life does not have to talk to you at this door here to tell you that you're hungry. If it does, you are in bad shape. You are a mutant, and I don't mean a teenage turtle ninja. You are a doomed mutant. The middle class, the healthy part, the bourgeois of life's central nervous system via man, does not have to be told about, especially what I was describing as the primary areas, through this door. It talks to man in a way that's not dissimilar. It's not important, but it talks to man in areas below the intellect in ways not dissimilar to the same way it's talking to a dog or a possum, a cat or a Cadillac. But it is here that there is a singular door. Life is continually knocking at the door, non-stop. Life is also wired up people that ordinary people find it impossible not to answer the door. Now maybe this will be a little clearer than the ones I gave a hitting slap at last time we were taping. This does not include, nor does it exclude, if you can hear me, jump back and forth from allegory to non-allegory. It does not exclude you not answering the door when you know that it's someone to whom you owe money, or you know it's someone who is there to whip your ass, punch you in the snides, cut out your liver. See, because you have answered the door anyway. It doesn't matter whether you actually answer the door. You have responded to the door, which is what answering the door is. As long as you think ordinarily, as long as you take the noise, all the information, all the demands, all the requests, all of the that you hear constantly, as long as you answer the door, you're not going anywhere. You're going to spend your whole life right where you are, that is, at home, right in here, wherever that is, whether you're in New York, New Guinea, Portugal, or Pittsburgh. You're going to stay at home in here because you'll spend the rest of your life answering the doors you're supposed to. And beyond that, most of you seem to have missed it, so I'll repeat it. Beyond that, once life has got you, as everybody does in the beginning, but if you continue to go along and you answer the door, you've got to see it doesn't matter who's at the door. That's irrelevant, literally irrelevant. It doesn't matter what they're there to say. It doesn't matter. They're there to say something. Life is saying, it doesn't matter whether you're saying, God, I feel guilty about eating so much. It doesn't matter whether you're saying that or whether you're saying, ha, I'm glad I finally got even with that son of a gun. It doesn't matter what is being said at the door. It doesn't matter what the message is. It doesn't matter who apparently the guest is. Once life has got you to answer the door, it's of no longer any importance of whether you find the message and the knocker, if there seems to be a noun involved, a person, a figure, an institution. It doesn't matter whether you find it pleasurable, agreeable, but it seems that way to ordinary people. That is what keeps the intellect running back and forth to the door and then back to apparently its own devices. That is, the intellect apparently responds to out here, and then it runs inside, and it kind of reflects. Of course, it's going on like this, the dance, and people don't really notice, but it's a continual ring to the door. And then you run back, and then you run the door again, and then somebody else there, and it just happens like this. And people believe, wait a minute, God, that was bad news. Whether the bad news was out there, or whether the bad news seemed to come inside of you thinking, God, I'd like to strangle her. Oh, I feel horrible about that. She's my own sister, my own mother. What would Freud say? You apparently, if you're ordinary, do have a legitimate response as to whether you're pleased by what's going on at the door, whether you like the message, whether you agree with it, whether it seems like that you continually receive messages maybe from out there, from the general run of dunderheads, that they're always giving you some kind of faulty information, always telling you something that nobody wants to hear. It doesn't matter. In a sense, if you can hear this, life doesn't care. Individual. It's got no time to fool with it, which is not the point. I'm trying to get you to take a quick look somewhere else. That life no longer cares nor does it have to, whether you individually like, dislike, agree with, find pleasurable, or irritated by what's going on at your door. As long as you'll answer the door, that's all life wants. That's why you need to begin to see it's the matter of words being a form of energy, but what they seem to be specifically is of secondary consequence. That as long as you'll answer the door, it doesn't matter whether you open the door and somebody says, "Happy birthday to," or whether you open the door and somebody says, "Die, sucker." In one case you may go, "Oh, I love it." Or in another case you go, "Wait a minute, what does this mean?" Or in another case you go, "Well, I hear what you're saying, but you could not be more incorrect." Life doesn't care. All you got to do is answer the door. That's all life demands, that you answer the door. As to what you seem to think about what's going on at your door, the information, or take that as what seems to be the process of information, opinions, forecasts coming in, or whether it seems to be in particular cases a matter, instead of it being verbals, being nouns. People. Whether you like the people, whether you like what they have to say, it no longer matters. As long as you'll answer the door. Now, do you recall I suggested there might be a method, if any of us had a method, that the one for the 1990s I might describe, which I didn't, but I said I might describe as the continual act of thinking more than you have to. Can you see that as a method to deal with not answering the door? Now, for you people, maybe just running across this a few times, this has nothing to do with ordinary people and the knocking on the door and ordinary people sitting around and sweating, worrying about, thinking about, daydreaming about what this may mean, whether I like it, whether I don't like it, whether it's fearful, whether it cheers me up. That's not thinking. That's not thinking more than you have to. And you cannot say, of course you're ordinary, you can say this, but you're wasting your time. You cannot say, "Well, sometimes I can hear the door go," and that sort of thing concerns me so much that I do think more than I have to. No, you don't. Only people who do it know this. You can't fool yourself to know whether you think more than you have to. Now, insofar as this being a kind of method to keep, or method to deal with not answering the door, I was going to point out some specifics that if you can think continually more than you have to, then the knocking on the door, that is the constant energy feed. It's not the networks, the local stations, unless you want to look at it that way. It's the universal network of life itself sending you the local feed to your local station, and the door is continually being, that is here. You're continually thinking. If you think more than you have to, then you can use that as a method of not answering the door in several ways that I could verbally describe. One is, if you think more than you have to, you can figure out who's there without actually answering the door. You can tell, and also if you think more than you have to, you can tell where they came from without having to ask for their passports. You can ascertain what their message is going to be without actually opening the door and letting them come in to recite it. And you can, without opening the door, you can figure out whether they're worthwhile knowing or not. You can do all of that without answering the door, which is another way of saying you can do, you can figure out, you can experience, you can see every message that life sends at the ordinary level, which we're talking about now, this door, the intellectual door. Every thought that life sends out, you can experience, figure out, see through, without thinking the damn thought. That's it. Yeah. But if you can figure out how to think more than you have to, you don't have to go to the door and open the door. You can figure out what's on the other side. Now we're talking about, let's assume you got a nice big fat opaque door with no peephole. You can figure out who's out there, what their message is, where they came from, what the purpose is. and whether it's worthwhile to you. All without answering the door. That is, all without actually becoming a participant of ordinary thinking. A few tapings back, I gave you a crude version in passing. It seemed to be pretty crude based on the reaction. It seemed to be at that time having to do with cities in Arizona and Connecticut. So I'll give you a translation. The translation's coming up for those of you that can't remember or got no idea what I'm talking about. Back a little bit to the last time we were taping. Notice this. Politically, everyone's born a citizen. Religiously, everyone's born as a child of their God, whatever genetic line they were in. And personally, everybody is born as an individual within the non-personal body of life itself. Which the last one wraps up the first two, and any others I could throw in, but I was trying to slide you up to it. Everybody got that? Now up to the translation from my side swipe that seemed to be speaking about Phoenix and Hartford. Here's the translation. Is that man is born in captivity so as to dream of freedom. That does leave open a question. If you don't think you got it, don't worry, I hadn't dropped it yet. But that opens a question as to who is to define freedom. Before I hit that, let me point out though, for someone attempting to do this, the question is not, as it's always been, and still is, it's not a question of is man in a condition of freedom or is he not? It could be a man who actually owns an accordion repair shop or cleans out septic tanks. He does not have to be a philosopher. He does not have to be an academic. Some of you, I think, have been able to see when I pointed out before, everyone deals with the question of does man have freedom or does he not? They deal with it on the basis continually of the knocks at their own door as to whether you're going to hold yourself responsible, where you'll admit any liability for something you've just done, especially if it seemed to be a fox pass. Don't write me. Popeye. Or on a case of someone else, that someone has stepped on your foe, on your paw. Are you going to hold them responsible? Is it a member of your family? Is it somebody you like? Do they have a good story? Is their story such as, well, hey, you just did the same thing to me about 5 minutes ago? Well, yeah. Everyone is dealing with this question because it is a part of the background of the knocking going on all the time. So you don't have to be a philosopher when I say that everybody's dealing with the question of does man have freedom or does he not? Everybody's dealing with that. If you have an intellect, that is, if you're talking, no matter where you are, you could be out in the wilds of New Guinea or Brooklyn, some less civilized place, you are continually, all humans are dealing with the question, does man have freedom or does he not? That is what's going on with all forms, I'll start putting words, but it's a form of energy, all forms of justification, self-justification, accusations, excuses, all conversation somewhere is tied to the question of, does man have freedom or not? The person that's just speaking to me, the opinion they just gave me is as dumb as that is. Are you going to hold them responsible? Are you going to say, well, Jesus, did you go to school to get this dumb? Where'd you get your brains? By mail? You know, am I going to do that? Or for whatever the conditions seem to be, or am I going to be somewhat magnanimous and go, well, we should take pity on those who have less education than us. Perhaps there was some sort of brain damage. People are continually simply on the basis of, am I going to be responsible for who I am and what I do, and am I going to demand that other people be responsible? That is the basis, the behavioral basis. It does not have to be verbal and does not have to be philosophical of the question, does man have freedom or not? That was all by way of introducing the rest of the sentence. For somebody attempting to do that, the question of whether man has freedom or not is not the question. From a more complex view, the question is this: what would be freedom? What is freedom to me? Not this question. Not everyone else having to answer the door and continually dealing with what seems to be their behavior, whether it be controllable or uncontrollable according to their view at any particular time, or whether other people's behavior seems to be controllable or uncontrollable according to your view at that time. The question is, without any reference to what's on the other side of the door, other people knocking. It's not a question of whether are the people knocking on my door and shouting out these obscenities, shouting out these threats, shouting out these promises, are they free to do what they're doing? Do they know what they're doing? Are they being driven? Is biology destiny? Not with me, of course, except when I need to. That's why that guy, you remember, wrote from the other side and apologized for ever coming up with the phrase. Well, I see that got the same response it got first time around. It is not a question, from a more complex view, trying to do this, of whether you or anyone else has freedom or not. It's a whole new question. The question is, what is freedom? What is freedom for me, if I had it, if I could get it? Or to keep it simple, what is freedom? That's the question. And nobody on the other side of the door can answer you. The part of you that wants to answer the door can't answer. The question has to be asked from a whole new building site in the intellect. But it's not whether man has freedom. Just forget all that. Of course, you get to that point, I don't have to say forget all that and do hand gestures. You forget all that. Of course, I could insinuate that then you know something already, so for me to say you forget all that, it's of no consequence. It's no longer relevant to you. That is the question. The only question then to you is, what is freedom for me? By the way, this is another great example, if we need any more. And evidently I'm going to pretend we did because I'm about to whip it on you. Another great example, first story phenomenon. And I knew that already, dynamics. Well, in that, everybody knows what freedom is. And I just said that would be a whole new question from a whole new area within a person's own intellect. What is freedom? What could be a better example of first story? That life is, yes? Or the phenomenon of, oh, I knew that already. It's to ask somebody, or for me to announce, or let you do it. Why, I'll make a fool of myself to say the problem. The question now is, what is freedom? The whole world, except for the mutants. The whole world would go, because everybody knows what freedom is. Okay, well, everybody knows what freedom is except a real revolutionist and, of course, everybody else. Well, I was going to give you some suggestive sketches, not a whole piece of a map, but in response to my own ipsedixit question of what is freedom, that would be the question. What might be freedom at another level? Now, it's beyond any question of, does man, ordinary man, and you can take it right to the door, to the intellect. Forget about freedom if we're going to chop up arbitrarily, again, for a useful temporary purpose, of man into like the cerebral operations of the nervous system, then like the limbic parts of the nervous system, the sensations that seem to be the seat of emotions, and then just ordinary physical, motor life of man. There's no question of freedom if you're sane. If you're anything but a mutant, there's no question of, you just, unless it's a hobby, but there's no question of freedom say, if we could divide just the human physical organism with no intellect, just arbitrarily cut it out, there's no question of freedom. You don't want freedom to be able to, well, I'd like to have an arsenic sandwich. No, that's not freedom. I'd like to be able to eat anything I want to. I'm sick of just eating things that humans are supposed to eat. I'd like to eat a tire iron. I'd like to have a tossed salad of armadillo nightmares. The question of, I wish I was free to hate my mother. I don't mean just dislike her a little bit like I read in that psychology textbook in 101. I'd like to be able to hate my mother the same way I hate, armadillo nightmares and zucchini. God, I wish I could hate me more. Sometimes I feel better about myself. I wish I could hate me enough that not just commit suicide. No, I deserve worse than that. That just every day I'd torture myself. I would relive the Chinese death of 10,000 pierces, that every day I'd just strip off a little of my skin or stab myself one more time, and I'd slowly die. Boy, I wish I could do that. You understand? That's silly. I don't have to carry any further. So the question of freedom, well, for any of you who I do, the question of freedom only applies, once you understand, it's no big trick, the whole question of freedom only applies here. That is, what seems to be the singular ways in which humans behave. The kinds of behavior that they question about themselves and each other. That's the only place where the question, this eternal question of, is man experiencing freedom, is he free or not? So we're talking about what would be an extraordinary kind of freedom that people do not think about. And it's freedom here. I just want you to get away from any idea that, well, I'd like to be free to jump off a building and not fall down, and crash. Good luck. I'd like to be free to even have greater nightmares and daydreams than I do about people from other planets and Atlantis talking to me. Why not? Go ahead. I'm talking about now freedom that would be uniquely human. And it would be uniquely human on the basis that it would benefit, if you belong in fooling around with this stuff, it would benefit you, not life. And it's got nothing to do with anybody that will ever come to your door. Here's the kind of freedom I was going to suggest with just rough sketches, that this kind of freedom might be. It'd be the kind of freedom that you might be able to avoid the general demands of life that you understood do not specifically aid you. And withal to be able to pursue special interests you seem to have that do not seem to serve any particular purpose to anyone else. Which, of course, we're referring to this. It doesn't make anybody else happy, you know, if they know about it. You can't make them happy that you're doing it. It cannot be proven in any way that you doing this is of any direct benefit to anybody else, even if you don't tell them. It is not necessary. We all know that by now. Well, I hope you all do. It is just not necessary. It's just not necessary at all. Your life does not depend on this. It did not depend on this before you got here. What any great mystical, metaphysical, occult, cuckoo hungers and dreams you had before you got here that you thought, I cannot live without it. I'd travel, the good old stories, I would travel, crawl on my belly to Tibet to meet someone that knew the great secrets. That's not thinking more than you have to. That's not even crawling more than you have to. But freedom might be to be able to do those things, to pursue some interests you've got that there is no other basis for doing other than you want to. The extraordinary freedom might also be that you could think from no known position. The extraordinary freedom might be that you could think in your own new language. Your own, not anybody else's, not mine, not anybody to ever show up to your door. Of course, people can show up to your door via books. They can show up to your door via books and genetic memory from 5,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, last week. People already dead. People already alive. But for you to be able to think in your own language. Of course, this still fits into it would be pursuing interest of your own, because of your own language, nobody else is ever going to know about it anyway. This kind of extraordinary freedom, I might also describe, could be perhaps that you could begin to create your own first stories and then immediately reject them and forget them. Think about it. Well, if I have to be crude, it's like any time that the circumstances seem to be right, you can finally, as all ordinary people like to imagine, you can become a prognosticator. You're suddenly aware that just in a split second, somebody's going to knock on the door with a first story. That is, something just happened to me, and I'm about to think, oh my God, or I'm about to think, oh, I'm frightened. You're about to ordinarily think. And so it's, but just before it happens, you know about it. And before life can holler, Western Union, first story here. You know it's about to happen. It's like the pre-echo. You remember on a record or on a tape, you can hear the first few notes of the song about to come up. You know life's about to go and give you the first story about what's going on. That is, tell you what to think. And just before it happens, you can tell yourself, I'm suggesting, your own first story. Just in a split, before any of this happens, you can tell yourself your own first story, blah, 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 and then go, and then just reject it. That takes care of that. This kind of extraordinary freedom, I was going to also suggest, might finally be this. This kind of freedom might be the freedom not to ever answer the door and never regret it and never remember it. Or still got a couple of minutes, so I'll give you, that could have been the last one, but there is a sub-carrier to that one, which I could have made the fini, that kind of extraordinary freedom might be that you just never answer the door, never regret it, and just never have second thoughts about it, because you just don't answer the door, and you never remember you didn't answer the door. But let me give you a corollary, a subcarrier to that. It might also be this kind of extraordinary freedom. It might be that you can hear multiple knocks. And do all the kinds of figuring I just talked about a few minutes ago, being able to figure out who's there, where they're from, what the message is, whether it's worthwhile for you to actually get the message or meet them personally. You could do all that and never answer the door. So the final one I was giving in response to my own question as to what might be possible descriptions of an extraordinary freedom. That one of them might be not only never answer the door, but the corollary being, instead of just that, being able to hear multiple knocks, which they're there, but the intellect is not normally constructed to hear multiple knocks. Now, if I had more time, but some of you already figured this out. People are aware, they never use my term since I made this whole thing up, the map. People are aware that there's multiple knocks. It's like diverse impressions. It's like different voices calling for your attention. It's like being in a meeting and somebody over here in one department says, you made some speech or some proposal. Somebody says, well, how about, and at the same time somebody over here goes, well, how about, you go, wait a minute. Is everybody, because of the way the senses and the ordinary intellect is operating, you have to go, wait a minute, wait a minute. All right, Bill, what was yours first? Or Fred? All right, we'll get to you in a second. That you can only do one. So people are aware that, well, there's all kinds of impressions and input and noise and light going on. I'm suggesting a kind, if you could think from a whole new position, a new building site in your own intellect, in your own brain, literally, and you had your own language, that you might then be able to entertain, to be aware, to be conscious, but to be figuring and entertaining multiple knocks, and to simultaneously be doing all this figuring out while they're going on. Do all this simultaneously, never answer the door, and never have any particular preference as to what you're entertaining. That is, the multiple knocks. Some of you that may be getting hip to my verbal wildness at times, you might see that this is, from one view, another way simply of putting never answering the door. And never regretting it, and never remembering it, never thinking about it. I know it sounds like the opposite, or it's supposed to. Unless you're doing better than you should, unless you're thinking more than you should, then it's not necessarily just the opposite. But rather than not answering the door and not regretting it, not thinking about it, would be able to become aware, to entertain, to continually hear multiple knocks. They're going on all the time. And not just, remember, the knocks are not just the information apparently coming from out there, it's inside of you. It's all the so-called ambiguities, the uncertainties in life. Things that when you go, well, I don't know, should I stay here with her? God, I've invested 4 years, and plus I paid for most of the furniture. Should I leave her? Should I quit this job? Should I move to Peoria? Or should I stay here? All of that. That is going on. That is multiple knocks at the door. I suggest a certain kind of freedom, other than just being able to ignore all that, but I'm talking about totally ignore it. Another way is to entertain, to hear them all simultaneously, not just one at a time, and not just this one and then this one, but to hear them all, and still be able to figure simultaneously all the things I said about all of them. Simultaneously it's got to be. Of who's there, where they came from, what the message is, do I want to hear it, is it worthwhile? To do all that simultaneously, with no particular prejudice. I don't care who's out there, I don't care what the knocks are, one knock's not any better than the other. But it's almost as though, if you can hear this end, or at least this tape, of being able to never answer the door, period, but to actually be able to do it. That is, not answer it, and that's just it. You don't think about it, you don't wonder, you don't say, well, are they still there? I wonder if they'll come back. None of that. You just don't answer the door, and that's it. Either that, or to be able to hear continually the simultaneous, the plurality of knocks that are always there, and to be able to simultaneously do the figuring that I was talking about to all of them, or to at least to a plurality, to more than one knock, to be able to entertain, whether it seems to be out there or in here, conflicting opinions, conflicting information, forecasts for tomorrow's weather, the upturn, the downturn of the market, and have no preference. You just entertain them all. You figure on all of them simultaneously without ever having to answer the doors. The doors. We always count up, so here we go. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.